and joining us now to discuss the latest developments in U.S.-China relations on the heels of that meeting between President Trump and China's Xi Jinping is David Zhang, the host of the show China Insider. David, your initial thoughts. How did the meeting go in your view?
Yeah, I see it as, especially reading the Chinese readout, that this was pretty much a full concession from Xi Jinping, mainly to the point of buying the energy from Alaska as well as the fentanyl. Now, provided this is all under the promise that things will be kept the ways that Xi says they will be, such as the fentanyl crackdowns. And you can see clearly that the 10% drop in tariffs is also because of the promise that there will be a fentanyl crackdown. So it is a deadly weapon that they've launched against the United States, and I think many will be focusing on that. Now, when it comes to things like soybeans, I think it's nice that is returning to regular business, but I don't think that was the main point. And another one I see is that inside the Chinese readout, words like security, words like red line, or even Taiwan, as it was mentioned earlier, they've not been discussed this time. So obviously, this is not the full trade agreement. This is a first step. And again, it's building on the idea that things will be kept as they are. But given the CCP's track record with these things, such as fentanyl, it's been a bargaining chip for the last decade or more. We have to see some concrete actions. I believe the administration is also trying to see that before things proceed further.
And the way the agreement was structured, as you mentioned, in steps, does account for that and this unreliable nature of the Chinese Communist Party. But overall, do you think the U.S. came out stronger from that meeting, either within itself or compared to the Chinese Communist Party?
I think obviously the rare earth issue is one where the United States has to focus on, and it's going to take time. Frankly, I think it's going to take 5 years from this point on for the United States to even begin to have an independent supply chain of rare earth minerals. So unfortunately, that does mean that in trade-offs, there's the 301, the 232 investigations are also paused. So there is clearly a trade-off there. But I think, again, if you look at the long-term process, the rare earth card that the CCP plays can only last so long before the world essentially alienates it from it. And in exchange, what the CCP wants is continuous export into the United States and other countries. And it, frankly, is the only industry in China that is still providing some type of a profitable income. Now, their housing market is down, their domestic consumption is also down. So in that sense, if they lose the export window right now, it's also bad for them. So I said it was an equal trade-off in a temporary ceasefire.
Based on what we've seen so far in recent action from the Chinese Communist Party and their aggressiveness around Taiwan, they're still looking to make moves in that direction and still want to take it over, it seems. Based on the fact that China has been building up its military at a rapid pace, and President Trump mentioned that when he announced and spoke about the move toward testing more nuclear weapons, do you think this pause in 1 year that could, for 1 year on export restrictions with U.S. chips, could potentially compromise security from the U.S.'s standpoint?
I don't think so, in the sense that before the meeting, the president had already signed a nuclear submarine deal with South Korea, and going to Japan and meeting with the new prime minister shows you that there's clearly a new level of engagement with partners and allies in the region. And the common goal here is targeting the CCP. And the new Japanese prime minister, Sanae Takaichi, is very, very much, the follow through to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's ideas of returning Japan to normalcy in its constitution, or possibly to go down that path. And the biggest threat in the region to both Japan and South Korea is China, and obviously fueling North Korea in that sense. So I think even if there was some type of trade concessions, the alertness or the preparedness in the region has not slowed down, and the military possibility of an invasion of Taiwan is going to be met with resistance. And it's not something that we can see being conceded to in this trade talk so far.
Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party continues its perpetration of persecution against its own people, the Falun Gong, House Christians, Tibetans, and others in China. We haven't heard that any of that was brought up in the meeting. Typically, Western nations do bring these things up and try to apply pressure privately on the Chinese Communist Party. What do you make of there being no mention of that? Do you think it's somewhere on the president's agenda at this time?
I think the main reason why it wasn't mentioned was because the CCP is in a protect the party survival mode. The reason I say this is because after the fourth plenum, there is clearly a huge shift in the way from the aggression towards more of a let's become a couple in the U.S.-China relationship. So this softer tone means that the party is in a state of survival. And unfortunately, forced organ harvesting is tied to the party's survival. It is the most egregious crime of this time. And if it is made public, I don't think any country would be willing to work with the Chinese regime. So in those cases where you can avoid to talk about it, you would. And that's really what the CCP wants. So I do believe that when Trump goes to China, or when Xi comes to visit the U.S., the president would bring human rights up. And I'm sure if there were any talks of it, but I know this time Taiwan wasn't mentioned. TikTok and the chips seemed like they weren't the majority of the time in the meeting either. So I think there's a lot of issues that didn't get through. Again, I think it's because this was a framework, work in progress. It wasn't a full agreement. So I think a lot of things weren't talked about.
Well, I'll be watching closely for the upcoming meetings that have already been forecast and scheduled for April and further out. Thank you so much, David Zhang. Good to speak with you.